I'm going to be introducing myself, and I'll be introducing both of my co-hosts for tonight. My name is Mariela Diocaris. I guess it's doctor because I did go to school and get a doctorate. I am one of the founders of Restore Health and Wellness, and I'm super excited to be hosting these kind of webinars. Hopefully you have been able to join us for other webinars, and if you haven't, we usually have a pretty extensive list of webinars that are coming up. So please feel free to join us for the ones that are coming up, as well as there's going to be a second part to this webinar. So this is just the first part. We're going to be doing a second part at the end of the month. And then we're actually going to be having a 6-hour series. That is the actual course for this intro. All right, so one of my co-hosts is Saul. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Saul Mesa, or Saul, as they called me while I was going through school. I've been married to my wife Yvonne for it's going on 27 years this coming May. So we've had our fair share of years living together and our fair shares of going through this is what we call a relationship. And we have 3 kids together. Our oldest is he's 20, about to be 23. He's currently in medical school. Our second son is going through his 3rd year of university. He's a business major. And then our youngest daughter is 17, and she's in her last year of high school. And a little background on myself is I was born and raised in Southern California. Went to school locally. As an adult, I've primarily been in business in the real estate and the ingredient, export and import of ingredients into our country for the nutraceutical and pharmaceutical end of different businesses. And that's a little bit of myself.
Awesome, thank you so much, Saud. Yvonne, would you like to say a little bit about you? You're muted, Yvonne.
You're muted, Yvonne.
Okay, now it's letting me unmute myself. My name is Yvonne Mesa, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And it's been a wonderful day overall. I have been married to Saul for an extensive amount of years. It's been a great experience, and we are very excited to be sharing a little bit of what's been going on with us, during our journey together. And it's a pleasure, of course, to be a part of Restore Health and Wellness Institute with my partner, Mariela, who has been with me and decided to start sharing more about health and wellness and supporting everybody in their journey. So today is a great day to be sharing a little bit more of my personal life, and along with my husband Saul. But I'm very happy to be here, and we appreciate that you have been taking the time to join us this afternoon.
Absolutely. So hopefully you are in the right class. Sometimes we have people that are not in the right class. So we're going to be talking about relationships today. And one of the things that actually makes this different is not only are you going to be getting a therapeutic or a counseling aspect about relationships, but you're also going to be getting the experience and the expertness from a couple that has been married for almost 30 years. And they will actually be the first ones to let you know that, and actually I think this applies to everyone, relationships are difficult. Relationships take a lot of work. Relationships definitely take commitment, and it's a choice that you make every day to want to continue to be in the relationship. So what we're going to be doing today is I'll actually be posting some questions in the chat. And these are going to be the same questions that Saul and Yvonne are also going to be answering. But this is, again, just a taste of what the actual series is going to be. It is on Eventbrite if you are interested, and we'll let you know the date at the end of this webinar if you would like to join us for that. So why don't we get started? Let's talk about relationships. We are going to be talking about expectations, and we're also going to be talking about intimacy, which we'll get the male and the female perspective of what intimacy means to each of us. But let's start with what are some of the healthy and unhealthy boundaries that each of you have for yourself, for your partner, and for your relationship? So Yvonne, would you like to start?
Yes. Well, healthy and unhealthy boundaries. This was a question that I was thinking of for a while because I think that I've been having a hard time with boundaries. I realized I didn't think how hard a time was having with them until I started really analyzing my life and thinking, okay, what are those healthy and unhealthy boundaries that I have been building and sharing in my relationship for myself and supporting my relationship and my partner. And I came up with some thoughts, and I figure that this has been a very difficult aspect for me. Why? Because even in my relationship, I had the opportunity to share and to explain those boundaries. During my time with my husband, there were some times when even though I had expressed those boundaries, I didn't feel that he would listen to me. He would not respect those boundaries. And that's why, even though I had the boundaries expressed and shared with him, it was not necessarily helping us in our relationship and my personal relationship as well. And that's why, I found that this was something that I needed to work more. And I think it was probably because of the difficulty with communication that we had. There was some disconnect in there, so that's I think why it was difficult for me to share with him my boundaries.
Well, and also the thing with boundaries is that they're very heavily attached to our values, right? They're very heavily attached to the expectations that we grew up with, that we saw from our own parents, and the things that we thought our partner should fulfill. And so then when we don't have those healthy boundaries, or we're not able to clearly communicate that, and we'll talk about communication in the second part of this series, but what not being able to clearly say, I need this, I want that. A lot of times it's when those disconnects within the relationship happen. And so when we're looking at some of the main topics in relationships where there's a lot of disconnect, we're looking at issues such as finances, we're looking at issues such as religion and spiritual practices, we're looking at family values, we're looking at how we raise children, what our expectations are of our partner to parent. And then we're looking at, what our expectations are when it comes to sex. So definitely those boundaries are very important to set, but also to realize what are these boundaries that I absolutely need. So your turn.
Well, boundaries is a term and a word that I knew nothing of when I first got married. Now, I'll give you, if I may, share a little bit of a background of my relationship and my marriage with my wife. We got married when we were in our very early 20s, and this was my second marriage. My first marriage occurred when I was 16 years old, and that marriage occurred because I had a child with my high school girlfriend, and so I came from a past relationship that had failed, and it failed at a very young age. And when my wife and I got married, we were still very young. We were 20. So boundary is something that I hadn't learned what it meant to have a boundary, because the only thing that I had to go by is the relationship of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And the relation, I come from a family from divorced parents. I was 10 years old when my parents divorced, and it was a very rocky relationship. It was a relationship where, you know, if you know a little bit about the Hispanic culture is very male driven, very male dominated. And so that's the foundation that I brought into my relationship with my wife, thinking and thinking that it was male directed, and you know, the male had the power, right? And so when we talk about boundaries, I didn't have any boundaries. There were no boundaries. And without boundaries, I mean, there's so many things that fall out of place, like respect, like communication. I was the be all, end all, you know, supreme master of my universe. And my wife just happened to live in my universe. So unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that we had boundaries, and maybe my wife wanted to create the healthy boundaries that are necessary in relationships. I had no idea what boundaries were. So boundaries was something that I had to learn within me being married, and through the journey that my wife and I have entailed for almost 27 years. I had to learn how to bring boundaries into our relationship.
Right. Well, and part of that is also allowing yourself to be vulnerable, right? Let's talk a little bit about what vulnerability means to you, and how comfortable do you feel being vulnerable in your relationship?
Well, for
Yvonne?
me, I have no problem sharing my feelings with my husband and being open. But again, I think about the upbringing has a lot to do with it in the cultural aspect. Um, we are Hispanic, and for our families, we tend to respect a lot the male figure, the leadership of the husband.
Mhm.
And um, most of the time, for Hispanic females, we are more inclined to be leaders of inside the house, and the husband would probably complement what we would do. But in regards to me being vulnerable, I would open my heart to him, and I would share my deepest emotions and feelings. But I felt that that communication problem would block that from helping improve our relationship.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, on my end, vulnerability, again, that was something that I had to learn throughout, you know, the course of my journey with my wife. Um, I think I think it's kind of normal, the stigma that we men are brought up and to not feel or not act vulnerable. As males, we want to know, or feel at least, that we have everything under control. And part of that is, you know, not to expose any vulnerability. And let me tell you, I mean, for many years, I couldn't. And that brought a lot of hardship to my marriage with Yvonne, because I couldn't share whether things were going bad at work or in my business. I couldn't share those things because I felt that I would be vulnerable. And showing this vulnerability would portray that I wasn't in control, or
Mhm.
maybe didn't have the ability to be in control. If I had a bad day and we couldn't perform, let's say, I wasn't in my right state of mind to be able to perform physically with my wife, I couldn't feel that vulnerability. And so that lack of vulnerability, or wanting to be vulnerable, brought somewhat of somewhat of anger, maybe rage a little bit, and then that infiltrated our relationship and then took it into a negative aspect. Instead of saying, you know, hon, I'm not mentally there today, I couldn't say that. I couldn't be vulnerable. And so I attested my lack of ability to be vulnerable by lashing out with anger or making her feel like she was making, bringing some type of negativity, twisting it around, and keeping that control to not show that vulnerability, to not say, hey, I'm not there. And again, this isn't something that through the years and with experience and with a lot of nurture and therapy, I had to learn.
Right.
But it's super important.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm curious what our participants, how they would answer this question as well. I'm posting the questions on the chat so that if you're participating, please share in the chat, or like I said, you can mute yourself and also participate that way. But, vulnerability is actually a pretty big topic in working with couples. If you don't feel safe within your relationship, if you don't feel safe with your partner, you're not going to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And it's not just when we're talking about sex. We're not just talking about intimacy. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about feelings. We're talking about letting our partner see those messy parts of us that many times we don't even want to see ourselves, because they're super messy, because they're super uncomfortable, because maybe we haven't taken the time or the space to deal with those areas of ourselves. And so, saying, okay, I can be vulnerable with my partner, that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of faith that your partner will continue to be there. And if you've experienced any type of sort of trauma, and realistically everyone at some point up to a point has experienced trauma, that's another layer of, I don't feel comfortable being vulnerable, because it's very easy to build walls. It's very easy to say, you know what, you just don't get me, forget it, and you check out of the relationship. So I know Yvonne and Saul, you both have experienced some pretty difficult hardships and hurdles within your relationship. I mean, 27 years, it's a long time. What would you say was one of the most defining moments in your relationship?
Well, I think we had a few. You're looking at a couple that we've been through therapy.
Mhm.
We've assisted a couple of weekend marriage retreats, all in this, for the sake of salvaging our relationship when we thought that we couldn't. And even then, it took years. It took years for us to get to a spot where we told each other, you know what, we have to define where we're at, and we have to define what path we need to take as a couple in order to make this right. And I think that was very important for us to realize that it wasn't just one or the other. It had to be a combined effort. And it wasn't until we, and I'm going to call it for what it is. It wasn't until because I can honestly say that my wife, I saw the commitment in our marriage from my wife from day one. And I saw the respect, and I felt the love, and her wanting to communicate was always there. Like any other couple, there were things that bothered me about my wife, but that's very normal when you have two people that come from two different families. She grew up in a different country than I did, so the values were different. The way of thinking was different, and you're going to get that in every relationship, right? But I wasn't checked in from day one. From the moment we got married, I came with so much baggage that we started on the wrong foot, and it wasn't until years later that I had to come to the realization that she can only take us so far, and she did. How she stayed firm with our relationship throughout all of the obstacles that we faced. Today, I ask myself, I don't know how she did it. I mean, it takes a very strong individual to be able to resist and to allow the things that the baggage that I brought into a relationship until I was ready to make the commitments that I needed to make in order for us to walk and start a path towards having a better relationship.
Right. So where would you say was that defining moment? What was the kind of push or shove, or, you know, what was it that did it for you?
I've always known that I loved my wife. So that was never the issue. But through the love, there was no communication on my part. There was no respect between myself and, you know, I wasn't giving her the respect necessary. There was infidelities that came into play. From a financial standpoint, you know, we you know, thank God that the finance issues hasn't always been an issue. I think we went through a hard time, and I think like most of our country did between 2008 and 2010, where the economy fell, and we went through a little bit of turbulence then. But you know, thankfully, you know, our finances have been okay. For me, it was, and this is going to sound, you know, a little off maybe to some of you, but for me, it wasn't until my children started realizing and noticing all of the negativity, all of the immaturity, all of the baggage that I was bringing into our household, and I felt embarrassed when my children started to rationalize, you know, that there were issues, and I realized that they knew that a lot of our issues was caused by my actions and my immaturity. For me, that in combination with realizing how many years my wife had, you know, had put up with such an unhealthy relationship that I brought to her, for me, that was a turning point. And again, therapy, those, especially one of the 2 weekends retreats. I wish I could tell you they're all good, that they're all great. And you know, we went through 2 retreats. One was okay. The other one had a lasting impression that even to this day, I carry it, you know, what I learned in that weekend retreat with me. But for me, Mariela, Dr. Mariela, that was a turning point for me.
And just to be clear, I am not your therapist, just so our participants know. I was not your couples therapist. And the retreat that he's talking about that wasn't great was not the retreat that we're going to be putting up. The benefit of us doing a retreat is that we know what has worked for you. And again, it's having those questions, it's providing that space in order to be vulnerable and say, you know what, these are the issues in my relationship and I'm here to work on them, and I want to be open about that. So Yvonne, what about for you? What was your defining moment in your relationship?
Well, for me, it was the time when he demonstrated with his actions that he was in. And I was always doubtful about that. And because of all the problems that we were going through, his actions were telling me something different. But there was a time when they were so strong that he said, I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove to you that I am here for you, that you are it, that I want to stay with you for the right reasons. And for me, it was basically that was the most important time, because I felt that I wasn't fighting alone, that I had somebody right next to me that was going to be doing everything possible to save our marriage. And that was, for me, that was the time.
Up until then, did you feel like you were still checked in the marriage, checked out of the marriage? Because Saud has mentioned there was some infidelity within the marriage, and as his partner, as any partner that has experienced infidelity, that's a pretty difficult topic.
Yeah, definitely very difficult. And I wasn't sure if we were going to make it or not. he was showing me through those infidelities that he wasn't happy with me, that he wasn't 100% in the relationship. And a lot of times I had the doubt in my head. I said, maybe he's just here because of the kids, and he's doing everything that he can, but he doesn't love me. It's because, you know, the kids are a very important part of his life. He's always been an excellent father. And I knew that his love was great for the kids, but I wasn't sure if it was there for me. But when he showed me with his actions that he was determined to stay, determined to fight with me, that was a great deal. That was something that helped me to move forward and feel the confidence that we could do this together.
Right. Well, you know, that's interesting that you say that to you, it was more effective when he showed you. And I know that before we started this, I had asked you both to do your love language assessment. And that is one of the things that for the second part of the series, we're going to be asking participants to also share with us what their love language is. If you do know what your love language is, please share it in the chat, but we'll be talking about it as well. And I can provide the assessment. It's a 5-minute assessment that, in case you don't know. So would you say that that is one of your love languages, or what are your love languages?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's difficult for us to communicate with words what our true feelings are, but the actions that he shows me every day, you know, when he comes to me, brings me a cup of coffee, he one of the things that I love about him is he wakes up in the morning and he always gives me a smile. And that tells me a lot. You know, he doesn't have to say anything. He just smiles, and he has this great smile, even if it's, you know, first thing in the morning when we're not dressed, we're not looking great, we haven't even brushed our teeth or anything, but he gives me this smile that really brightens my day. Really. So his actions, because I think that a lot of times we can say I love you, but if the actions are saying something different, that doesn't have enough weight.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about intimacy. I'm curious to see when you think about the word intimacy, and again, our participants can participate in the chat or unmute yourselves. So when you think about intimacy, what comes to mind? What do you think it is? What do you feel it is? What do you need from intimacy, or what do you need from your partner in order to build intimacy?
So I think, again, I'm going to come from it from a male's perspective. I think if intimacy is usually associated with the physical part of the relationship, or at least how many people might pursue it. I did. You know, I felt that intimacy was only the physical part. You know, and I think that throughout the years, I tried to make sure that, you know, my wife's physical attention was met. Of course, I did it for personal reasons as well. I mean, I wanted mine to be attended to as well. So I don't think, and Yvonne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from a physical standpoint, I think we've always shared a really good intimacy. Where I lacked was the intimacy of the other points that are very important in any relationship. And I believe Wendy wrote trust, emotional, you know, Lorena has emotional and physical. I didn't realize through our many years in the beginning that there was intimacy associated outside of the physical part of the relationship. And it wasn't until I realized the importance of having this intimacy outside of the physical part where, at least for me, the relationship with Yvonne started to flourish. But it's impossible for you to have those intimacies and to make them positive until you realize that how important they are in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yes. James, you have a question.
No, not a question. I just wanted to add my viewpoint of intimacy. I feel like intimacy is whether physical, whether emotional, but it's the connection that you have with your mate. So, I mean, we could be in a crowded room and look at each other and we know what we're understanding, and that's an intimate moment there. And so it's the connection that you have with your mate, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But the physical, what Saul was talking about earlier with the physical part, I forget who was talking about it, but when it was talking about the fact of, you know, if your mind is not there, it's hard to connect on the physical level. But I feel like intimacy in itself is that connection, but we can go deeper in the physical if we wanted to.
Absolutely.
Bring up a great, James, because again, in the early years of my marriage, I felt that the intimacy was only the physical part of it, right? I wasn't able to emotionally, mentally, intellectually connect with my wife. And so I just, you know, because I only had a one-way avenue of realizing what intimacy is, and how useful, how necessary, and how important it was to a relationship, it was impossible for our marriage to really flourish, because it takes two, right? In any partnership, it takes both. And no matter how much my wife tried to bring a lot of the important intimacies into our relationship, if I didn't realize what they were, even that they were necessary, because I didn't for many years. Again, I got married to Yvonne when I was 20. You know, our marriage didn't take off until we were both connected and we were both, you know, pointing towards the same direction and realizing how important some, you know, intimacy was in our relationship outside of the physical part.
Right. The interesting thing is, and I don't know if you guys were aware, there's actually between 4 and 8 types of different intimacy. We'll just talk about 4 here. One of them is experiential, emotional, intellectual, and sexual intimacy. So again, those are areas, or those are aspects of intimacy that we're also going to be talking more about in the series. But it's interesting because, and you know, I'll give Yvonne an opportunity to respond as well. And you know, our participants are also saying trust, emotional. These are types of intimacy as well. If you're, like everyone's saying, if there isn't that connection, if you don't trust your partner as much as you want to, the sex is probably not going to be phenomenal. Let's be honest, right? That connection, in order for you to have that connection with your partner, all of these foundational values, all of these things within your relationship, you need them. Nothing against one night stands. If that's your thing, I'm not here to judge. But I think that the older that we get, or it depends a lot on your emotional maturity of how much do you really want to connect with your partner, right? And what aspects do you need to be fulfilled when it comes to intimacy? As women, it's going to probably be very slightly different. Not to say that we don't think about sex, because as a woman, I think about sex and I want phenomenal sex. And if I don't get it, I'm not happy. And my family's gonna know about that, right? But again, different aspects of intimacy, and it's almost like if you don't have all the ingredients to make a cake, the cake isn't gonna be that great, right? Yvonne, what would you say is intimacy to you?
Yes, I think it's very important. And through the years, as I mentioned before, we had this disconnect, and I felt like I was not seen, that I was not understood, that I was not loved. There was not that connection wasn't there. And I was always looking for ways to connect, but in a way, I thought it was my fault for not knowing how to reach out to his emotions and develop this emotional intimacy that was needed. And I sometimes feel that if we had taken more time to learn about communication, maybe we would be able to mend those aspects. But yes, there was a big disconnect in intimacy. And there was another aspect that I was always concerned about, the spiritual intimacy that I would look for. For me, was very important to feel that he was with me in that aspect, and I couldn't find him. I searched and searched, but I wasn't able to connect with him in that aspect. So it was difficult. There were some times that were very, very difficult to find that intimacy, even though the um, physical intimacy was there, the other aspects were still a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, so let's talk about intimacy now. Do you feel that your relationship, because I know that you guys have put a lot of work into your relationship, let's be honest, what are your levels of intimacy now when it comes to the 4 different ones that I mentioned earlier?
Well, I'll start with the easy one. I'll start with the male one, and that is the physical. Yeah. And
the males in the room, if you agree with this, you can put a thumbs up. You don't have to agree with this. You're not speaking for all males, right?
speaking for myself, you're right. One of the bright spots of our marriage has been that from a sexual standpoint, I think we've always had that connection in different ways. Because I remember early in our relationship, my wife says, I want you to make love to me. And I wanted to have sex, right? And when she would ask me that she wanted me to make love to her, in my mind, I was like, man, this is a 30, 40, 50-minute session. And what do you mean, you want me to make love to you? I'm making love to you. I'm feeling it,
Right.
I had, it took time for me to understand the difference between just having sex and making love. And there is a difference, because for whoever says it's the same, once the duty is completed, the feeling is the same. Well, it really isn't, because even for myself, I says, listen, whether I'm having sex or what my wife deems as making love, at the end of the day, those 5 seconds of sensation feel the same. True, but what's going through your mind, through your body during the act, but especially what goes through your mind and your body after the act, that intimacy that you feel when you make love versus just having sex, there is a huge difference. And again, and I'm going to refer back to this, for me, I had to experience it and realize that there was another part of that physical intimacy that went from just having sex with my wife to making love to my wife. And I will say this, I have never had, and I would always tell my wife this, even through those times when my infidelities came to light, and I did say infidelities, plural. I wish I could say, I stepped out on my marriage one time. It was more than one time. And each time I knew that no matter who I had been with, I never felt what I felt with my wife. I never felt the same emotions, the same love, the same, complete completeness of what she gave me from that physical part of it. And I've never experienced it with anybody else but with her. And so that is very necessary to have that emotional connection, that spiritual. My wife mentioned spiritual, and again, from a spiritual standpoint, we can go one or two ways. Are we talking about spirituality when it comes to religion, when it comes to what you believe in, and I would like, Yvonne, if you can clarify that, or when you mentioned spirituality, were you mentioning the spiritual religious part of it, or what type of spirituality were you referring to?
Both.
Okay. Okay. And to me, it was very important I mean, the spiritual part of it was super great. And it became much better when we were intimate in such a way where we were making love and not just having sex. And I was able to give that to her, something that I always felt she gave to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yvonne?
How is now, it's way different. And I think it's been the experiential intimacy that has helped us to develop that closeness that we needed, and the ability to connect, the ability to communicate better. And now for me, intimacy now, when he goes in the morning, he leaves and he kisses me on my cheek before he goes. It's different when I go to him, I get closer and we hug before he goes. To me, it's intimacy for me.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, right, absolutely. Intimacy, I see it as the things that you build right before actual intercourse, right before you have sex. So it's almost like foreplay. And foreplay, let's be honest, foreplay doesn't have to be like a 5-minute thing right before intercourse. Foreplay should be like an all day, every day that you're building and you're creating, and you're getting creative with, and hopefully you're surprising your partner in a good way that they like, not in a way that you're scaring them. But intimacy, that's what it is. It's that foreplay in different areas of your life, right? Not just the sexual, but also the emotional, the intellectual, all ways that we can create foreplay. And I think that, when I work with couples, to me, it's baffling that marriage and relationships are such a huge part of our adult life, and yet we get such little, if any, education as we grow up about them, right? For many of us, our education was seeing our parents, and I can tell you from a personal perspective, the example that my parents gave me was a terrible example. Their relationship was terrible. It was super unhealthy, extremely toxic, not something that I wanted to bring into my own relationships. And so then add on to that, now I'm married, or I'm old enough to have sex, and I'm supposed to have this phenomenal sex because that's what porn says that I should be having. And when it doesn't happen, I'm like, wait a second, I missed the class or something happened. Why is it not happening like I'm seeing it happen in porn? And porn is actually the worst example to learn how to have sex. But we don't have that education of, you know what? You need that connection with your partner in order to have amazing sex. You need to have these building blocks. You need to invest in your partner in order to have that amazing experience. And so, again, these are all things that we're going to be talking more about in the series. An hour is obviously not long enough, but we wanted to give you guys an introduction on what are some of the topics that we'll be talking about. I do want to open it up if any of our participants have any questions for any of the three of us, or are there thoughts that you'd like to share with everyone, please feel free to do so. While we're waiting for questions, one of the things that we'll also be talking about, and I know that Yvonne and Saul and I have had this conversation before, is about the aspect of open relationships. And everybody has a lot of thoughts and views about open relationships. Obviously, they are not for everyone. And I know that Saul and Yvonne, I've asked you this before, but was that something that you guys had thought about doing?
Well, societies throughout time change. And our parents' way of viewing things, our grandparents' way of viewing relationships, much different than ours. And even mine are much different than my kids. I have my oldest son is 32, he's married, and his philosophical views of relationships are quite different than mine, as mine are of my parents. I feel that we live in a society today where, and I've mentioned this to Mariella, it's an easy swipe left. We have our phones, and when we're in a page and we don't like it, what do? We swipe left. We get it out of the screen and onto the next page or onto the next app. And unfortunately, I think we tend to do this, or that's the same philosophical views that a lot of today's younger generation is bringing into relationships. That if something doesn't work, or if something's not working today, it's easy just to swipe left and to start all over. I noticed, and relationships is more than just marriage, right? Relationship is relationships. I mean, some people decide to take the step of marriage and make it official through the civil court, through church. Other people don't. Other people get together and they build a relationship, and it's a relationship, nevertheless, but it's so easy in today's world to see that if it's not working, then it's not working. We give up on it and we move on. And that's why in the marriage, from a marriage perspective, the rate of divorces today is exponentially higher than ever. I mean, it used to be, I mean, years ago it was 50-50, and even that was really high, 50%. I think now we're up to 60%, a little above 60% is what I last read. It's so easy just to get out because you swipe left. You have, in order for a relationship to work, whether it's a partnership at work. I mean, I've had partners in the business world, and the same rules kind of apply to a certain extent. It takes both partners or three partners or whatever that partnership consists of. It takes you being aligned in the same direction for it to work, because if it doesn't, and it's not going to last very long. Before we jumped in today's live, we were discussing, Dr. Mariela, with you, the fact that it's usually when people are looking for marriage, relationship counseling, is usually because the relationship is failing. There's trouble in the relationship. My experience in this is that it's usually one person trying and another one having a foot out the door. And sometimes having a foot out the door means they just want to shut the door and keep it closed. They're done. They swipe left already. And for any relationship, marriage to work, it takes both partners convincing themselves that we want to make this work. We want to try. And, I know that we are in a really bad place. We're in a really bad place in our marriage, but we're willing to give it a try. And it's not until then, for me at least, it wasn't until I realized that I had to make so many changes in myself before I can bring some positivity into my relationship, into my marriage with Yvonne. It wasn't until I told myself and convinced myself that I wanted to align my thoughts, my feelings, together with Yvonne to walk that path. It wasn't until then that our relationship, our marriage started becoming positive. And it was a long journey. I wish I could tell you it happened overnight. What did happen overnight is me coming to the realization that I wanted to do it. That did kind of occur from in a very short notice. But walking that path and starting that journey, it took a while, and we both had to be connected, and we both had to be under the same realization that it was a long journey, but we both were willing to take it. And almost 27 years later, thankfully, we're here.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Yvonne?
Open relationships. Well, I think I go back to my my upbringing and my image of marriage and relationships. My parents, the way I saw them, they're still together, even though their relationship has been difficult and they have struggled. So I guess that's what I learned. I learned that you love someone, you marry that person, and you're there until you die. And I guess that's why Saul was saying earlier, why did she stay? I said, stay because I believe in love. I believe in and staying with the person that you're in love with, and you fight for it no matter what. And my parents have been together. They've been having a lot of difficulty, and even in health, their health has been very challenging, especially for my dad. But they're still together. They're still trying, and I think that's what I believe. I believe that you love someone, you fight for your love, and you do everything you can to save it. And I think that's where I stand in regards to that aspect.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for opening up and for sharing, and everybody that has participated and attended today. Please sign up for the second portion. It is going to be on March 30th, I believe, at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And also we will be having a 6-hour 2-day series in April. It is up on Eventbrite, so we invite you to join us. There is a cost to that, but you'll be getting 6 hours of us and these conversations. You'll also be getting a pretty extensive workbook, which we'll be working off of. That's going to give you some space to work through some of the issues that have probably brought you to these type of webinars. One thing that I will say, as somebody that provides counseling to couples and individuals, usually when people come to see me, it's because they're almost ready to give up, right? A lot of times it's more of a reactive action as opposed to a proactive behavior. So just something to keep in mind. But we are definitely excited to be hosting these webinars. If you have any questions, I will be, hopefully you've received the email that I sent out on Monday. If you haven't, I'll be sending a copy of this recording so that you have it. And hopefully we'll see you in about 30 some days. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you.